Hey friends, it's RSKT, and this is the AE Modular Starter Rack 2. It's a tiny little modular synthesizer, and it's a lot of fun. The AE in AE Modular stands for Abused Electronics, and it's made by a small company called Tangible Waves. In today's video, I want to give you a brief overview of what this thing is and what it's capable of, and just talk a little bit about modular in general. So I've actually had my eye on this system for quite a few years, ever since it was actually announced. And back when it was announced, the only available version of it had little wooden front panels, which looked really cool and clean to me. However, I found that apparently in super hot climates, that wood can sort of swell and whatnot and get a little bit funky. And I don't know if all of you realize this, but I actually work out of my garage in Queensland, Australia, which is a very hot place. And I'm yet to get a air conditioner to fit in here. So yeah, I didn't want any of that. These are sort of the new black panels, and they're made out of the same stuff that microchips are made out of, so no swelling. Now, I've really wanted to get into modular for quite some time, and I feel like this is kind of the nearest way that I can scratch that itch. I do have an Empress FX Zoya. I've messed around a lot with VCV rack. I really love modular. I love learning with it, and I love playing with it. It's just so much fun. But unfortunately, eurorack would just completely annihilate my bank account, and I'm not really ready to take that plunge yet. So I thought that this little system might be sort of like a really good entryway into getting started with modular. Also, before we get started, I really want to give a big shout out to Carsten from the Fifth Volt YouTube channel. He helped hook me up with this thing, and I'm eternally grateful. This thing has been a lot of fun so far, and you should definitely go and check his channel out if you want to see some more really cool AE modular content. So, being a modular system, what we're looking at here is a tiny case and a bunch of modules placed inside of it. Now, this is one of a few systems that you can purchase from Tangible Waves that are sort of pre-built for you. So this is the Starter Rack 2. There's a Starter Rack 1, which is pretty much one of these instead of the 2 rows. There's a Synth Explorer module, which doesn't really give you a lot of room to expand, but has more than enough modules to sort of play around with. Or you can pretty much, go the long way around and buy a case that's empty and start buying modules that you think are going to be relevant to you. Now, when I first got this thing, I was really excited to dive in, and I did for a few days. And at first I kind of thought, man, I really wish that I had more of these and more of that, which, is the age-old modular drug. But I haven't yet ordered any more modules because I really want to get my head around what's here and sort of have a bit more of an informed decision as to what I want to buy next. And in doing that, I've discovered that you can actually create a really diverse range of sounds with this thing. It's a lot more powerful than I sort of first gave it credit for, although, I still do have my eye on a few more modules for it. So what I want to do is unplug everything that I have here. So bye-bye, that patch is now gone forever. Great, so we're ready to go. Now, if you're wondering about the size of these things, I don't really have much here that I could compare it to, but I know that a lot of music lovers have a pocket operator laying around. So just for scale, the height of these modules is almost the same height as a pocket operator. So yeah, that might help put it into perspective for you. Now, to patch these, we use little jumper cables that you quite commonly see in breadboards. I already had a bunch of these laying around. However, you can get some from Tangible Waves, and yeah, they fit in really nice, and I haven't really had any problems with them so far. So at the top here, we have a master module. So this allows us to send audio in or out, CV, MIDI. You can, do a lot of different things with this system, and it's nice that we've got this in here. Of course, there's other modules that allow for more connectivity to the outside world, but this is what we can start with. So up here, we have 3 different sound sources. We have 2 oscillators in this dual hybrid oscillator. So 2 different oscillators in one. We have a single oscillator over here with a few more tools than we get on the dual oscillator. And we also have a noise oscillator with 3 different noise outputs. Next up, we have two separate LFOs in one module, followed by two different filters. So we've got a standard SP filter, and we have a wasp filter, which is like a really resonating sort of filter. I have a lot of fun with this one. It's really good for making acid. Going down the line, we've also got two envelopes. So an envelope up here and a separate envelope down there with a bunch of different attack and decay controls. Followed by that, we've got two VCAs. And then moving down to the bottom row here, we have a MIDI or clock divider, which is really useful for sort of sending different clock outputs. We've got a sequencer. Now the sequencer doesn't really look like much on the surface, but it's got a lot of really cool features. I'm actually pretty impressed by how much they managed to cram into this sequencer. I really like it. It's a lot of fun to play around with. Then we've got a mixer module, so we can send in 4 different signals and mix them together in this one module. We've got a logic module, which I honestly haven't really played around with all that much because every time I go to, I wind up patching something really, really cool with everything else, and I just don't really have any more room to patch anything. So I'm still not really sure how that's going to fit into my workflow, but I've got to go and read the manual a bit more. After that, we have a sample and hold module. This thing is going to help transform really dull and boring patches into a lot of really fun possibilities. I have a lot of fun with the sample and hold module, and I think that just goes without saying with modular in general. After that, we have this module. I can't remember if it stands for attenuator or attenuator, but basically it allows us to attenuate different signals and also just send up to 5 volts out. And I should mention that, so this entire system is working from 0 to plus 5 volts. There are no negative volt ranges. And then finally, the only little effect module we have in here is a lo-fi delay, which is a lot of fun to mess around with and can really help liven up the sound. So I've already talked a little bit about what all the modules are, and probably at the end of this video, I'm just going to throw in like a bunch of different demos of what I've made with this. I haven't had the longest time to sit down and play around with it, but I've made a few cool things that I'm really happy with. So yeah, let's patch something up together. So one thing that we're going to need to do straight away is probably patch our mixer module to our audio output, just up here. And that way, I'll probably feed everything into this mixer module and we can just control the volume a little bit better. Next up, I want to take this oscillator and let's take the square wave and I'm going to send it into the wasp filter's low pass gate. Now, if we were to take the low pass straight out into our mixer, I'll just turn this down in case it's very loud. Great. So we can control the pulse width here. Maybe we can switch it to lower octave. Get some nice dirt going. So yeah, that's really cool, but we don't want to have to listen to that like continuously. We want to sort of patch things in with a sequencer. So what I'm going to do is unplug that wasp filter, and I might use a shorter cable for this, just so I'm not going to run out of cables later on. We'll take the low pass output of this and put it into the input of our VCA. And then we'll take the output of our VCA and let's just plug it into our mixer for the time being. Now, obviously, we're not going to hear anything, even if this turned up all the way. And that's basically because we need to trigger our VCA with something. So I know that this is going to sound sort of complex to those that don't know a lot about modular, but VCA is essentially like a volume knob. But we want to tell the volume knob to turn up and down, and we want control over how that turning up and down happens, which is when we're going to use an envelope. And anybody that's used a synthesizer before should understand what an envelope is, but we also need to trigger the envelope. So this is where modular can get really fun because you can pretty much trigger an envelope with just about anything. For example, if we were to take this LFO over here and we'll send it into the gate, and we'll take the gate output and plug it into the CV input of our VCA. If we turn down the rate of our LFO, we can see that it's triggering our envelope. Now we can play around with the attack and the decay. Awesome, that's really cool. Now, let's say we wanted a little bit more variation in the note that's happening, because obviously at this point, we're just hearing one note playing. So what we want to do is trigger our sequencer. Now, normally I'd use a clock divider for this, but just for this example, let's take this LFO and we'll plug it into the clock of our sequencer here. So now we can see our sequencer is running. I'm just going to turn all of these down for the time being. Great. So just for this example, I'm going to take the CV raw down the bottom here. I'm going to go and plug it into the CV input of our oscillator. So at the moment, we're just hearing the one note ringing out, but let's start turning up some of these dials. Great. So that's a pretty boring sequence, and obviously if we start turning these knobs, it's not like they're really following any tune, and that's because it doesn't really know what a tune is. We're just using voltages here. So that's where something like a quantizer would come in handy to try and keep things in a scale, but we can also tune our oscillators ourselves. So currently I actually have, if we unplug this, no idea what this note is unless I have a tuner. We can move it around anywhere we want until we get a note that we like, but I have no way of knowing what that note is. Fortunately, we can still have a lot of fun with the sequencer. So I'm going to set all of these back to 0 again, or the letter P. And instead of using the CV raw, I'm going to use this CV out at the very top here. Now you'll notice if I turn these, it's a little bit less chaotic. And that's because what we're doing is, instead of turning this clockwise and just getting random pitches all the time, we're actually turning it to these numerical values that are around the edges, and they correspond with these knobs. So basically any note that I tune with these 4 knobs, we can turn to that at any time and kind of change our sequence on the fly without going out of the notes we've already set up for our sequence. Now, this allows us to change number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5. Number 1 is going to be set to the root note here, and the letter P is essentially going to hold that note out. So let's turn this up. If I change this last value, maybe we'll make the last step 5 and we'll turn this up. Great. So now I can switch any other one of these to the number 5. And there's our sequence. So far we've seen that we can send these CV values out of the sequencer, and we can also send the CV raw values by twisting and turning these knobs, which is super great. And we've actually also got a gate out. So anytime that these knobs are turned to a value, they're going to be sending a gate out. But if we turn it to the letter P, and you'll see when it skips this step, this light doesn't blink. So a gate out can be really useful for, triggering a kick drum or something like that. We've also got these separate triggers up the top here that correlate with their steps. But something else that's really cool is, if you look really closely, we have a mode CV input over to the side here. So at the moment, our sequencer is just running front to back. But if we were to take the, we'll switch to a +5 volt range on this knob here, we'll see that if I turn it up, and I'm hoping you can see this, there's a little red light that illuminates. So basically we're just sending +5 volts or like 0 volts. So what we want to do is patch this to the mode CV of our sequencer. And now you'll see that as I turn this, we enter different playback modes. Now we're playing backwards. We can play in a ping pong direction. We can play some randomness. Or go back to the original. So yeah, I mean, this is already really fun stuff. Now, I don't want to use up my bottom LFO here, but I kind of want to go crazy with this and just explore this sound a little bit more, patch up some things with the sample and hold and whatnot. So what I'm actually going to do is, instead of taking the clock straight from this LFO, I'm actually going to plug this in down the bottom where it says mult. So a lot of these modules have a little mult section on it, and basically anything you plug into there is going to duplicate that, so that we just have a few more plugs. So we're taking the square wave output of this LFO into here, and now we have 3 separate outputs of that. So what I'm going to do is plug this into the clock, and I might even plug it into the clock input of this step divider, which is just going to divide that input down the bottom here, and we can see that happening. Great. Something else I'd also like to do is plug this into the delay over here, and we'll take the delay out and plug it into our mixer. Let's introduce this slowly. Maybe we'll just turn up the rate of this a bit. Great, so I'm trying to do this kind of quickly because I feel like this is already going to be a long video as it is, and I still have the sound demos to play at the end. What I want to do is I'm going to take this LFO, this blinking LFO up here, and I'm going to plug it into the trigger input of this sample and hold. Now we're not really going to see anything happen just yet. Something else I might do is take the noise output of our noise oscillator, and we'll plug that into the sample and hold. So just to give you some, like a bit of an overview, this noise output just sounds like this. Great, we don't really want that. We want to use the noise and sort of smooth it out and kind of use it as like a more random modulation source. We can also adjust like the bit depth of it or the rate. But yeah, we're going to plug that into the input of our sample and hold, and our sample and hold is going to be triggered by this LFO. And now we can see that it is blinking randomly. I'm not sure if it's visible on camera, but sometimes the light is brighter and other times it's dimmer. So we're actually getting like a more stepped randomness of this noise oscillator, and it's being triggered by this LFO. So now we can do a bunch of really funky things with this. One thing we might want to do is we'll take the output of this and plug it into our attenuator thingy, the app. Great. Maybe we'll use a smaller cable for that so that I've got an extra long one. So that's the second port. Awesome. And now we can use this knob to sort of attenuate that signal a little bit more. So for example, we'll take the output of that and let's plug it into the CV input of our filter. So right now we'll turn this up and maybe we'll turn our delay down a little bit. Cool. So if we turn this, we're not really going to hear anything happening. We also need to switch this to in. Great. So as we turn this up, we can see that this light is blinking in tandem with this light. Cool. So what we need to do here is turn up the CV knob to tell it that we want CV information to modulate this. Now let's turn up this knob. Awesome. And if that's a little bit too much, we can just turn this knob down. Something else we might want to try is sending the sample and hold out to the decay of this oscillator. So just in doing that, this sound is already a lot more interesting and it has a little bit of groove to it. Great, so I really want a kick drum underneath this. So what I'm going to do is use our other oscillator over here, and I'll send it into the low pass filter of our SV filter. We'll then take the low pass out and let's send it into our second VCA. We'll take this VCA out, plug it into our mixer. And of course, we're not really hearing anything yet. And that's because we need to not only trigger this VCA with the output of our envelope, but we also need to trigger our envelope. So what I want to use is this little out B section of our MIDI clock divider down the bottom here. So let's take this and we'll plug it into gate 2. Great, so that's already a little bit high for a kick drum, so we just need to tune this. It's worth noting too that on these envelopes, we actually have a few different controls over like if we want this to be a slow envelope or a fast one. Or just how the envelope behaves entirely. I'm just going to play around with this until I get the sound that I'm after. Something like that should do the job. So yeah, I mean, this is already really fun to play around with, and we just made that in a matter of seconds. So yeah, I mean, I hope that this has been a really good overview of what you can get out of the AE Modular Starter Rack 2. I'm about to play a bunch of different patches that I've made, probably not too many, but just to give like a little bit of an example. Of course, you know, you can patch in your own sidechain if you want to build it that way. You can just do a hell of a lot with the modular system. And this is like a tiny modular system. There's still room to expand. You can get other cases and tie them together and pretty much make an entire wall of these things. There are third-party developers for a lot of these modules as well, but predominantly the most of them comes from Tangible Waves. I do hear that this system is also very good for learning like tinkering and sort of making your own components. There's a little breadboard module you can get, and you can solder together your own. There's just like a really great, fantastic community out there for this system, and I'm really glad that it exists because, as I said, I can't really afford to get into eurorack at this stage, and I'm fine with admitting that. But this is definitely helping to scratch that itch. This is a great ideas machine. It's a great little groove box. It's a great synthesizer, and it's just really fun. It's also worth noting that it plays really nicely with the Deluge, which is, you know, of course, an external groove box, which the Deluge already can do like a lot of things that this thing can't, but I've already found ways to have fun with this in ways that the Deluge can't provide. This can do like very different things, and when they're mixed together, they're just a lot more fun. I can't wait to get another sort of in-out module to connect up some CV capability to this thing. But for now, I think that I've talked for long enough. This video is huge and long, and I'm sorry about that, but I thought that I'd give a brief introduction while my Deluge is in the shop getting its OLED screen fixed. Hit me up in the comments if you have any questions, and expect to see this little guy hanging around on the channel for a while. I hope that you enjoyed this demo today, and I hope that you enjoy the sound demos that are about to play as well. Hit the like if you like, and if you don't, tell me why. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.